Good morning. Those of you who have been here before know how much I hate interrupting conversations, but I keep doing it every month. Sorry about that. You'll have another chance to resume those conversations afterwards and have another coffee and some more slice or Anzac biscuits. But now it's time to hear from this month's speaker. It's amazing how the months roll around and here we are again. Lots of familiar faces, but quite a few that I haven't seen before, and I suspect that Patrick's brought his fan club from U3A. But it's lovely to have... Sorry?
I paid them.
Oh, you paid them. Oh. But it's lovely to see everybody here today, and we're looking forward to hearing from Patrick. Janet's been trying to get Patrick for quite some time, and of course COVID is one of the things that's gotten in the road of that, apart from the fact that he's tripping around the world some of the time. So we're very lucky to have Patrick here today, and really looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. And just in case you made the mistake that somebody else made, that says Pyro Faces, not Pyro something else. Nearly spelled the same. So,
I guess you have it on.
just a little bit of bio. Patrick worked in the field of antiques for many years and as a photographer. Then he was able to combine his love of travel and photography by becoming a tour operator, mainly in the Middle East and North Africa. His interest in the culture and people of the countries he visited is displayed in his photography, and in 2021 he held an exhibition of his work in Kangaroo Valley. Patrick has been a popular presenter at U3A for some years, speaking about a variety of topics to do with travel and culture. He's recently returned from a month in Cairo, having stayed in the colourful medieval quarter. Patrick is going to speak to us today about My Egypt, beginning with his family's migration and including his latest trip to Cairo. And he asked me not to mention the Nobel Peace Prize along the way. Let's welcome Patrick.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay? Good. I'd like to make this a discussion rather than just me kind of blatting on. So please feel free to interrupt with questions or comments, but don't throw any fruit, please. What I'll be talking about today is, as John said, I'll just talk very briefly about my own connection with Egypt and with Cairo in particular, and then look at some of the people. This is not a travel log, and it's not a kind of history of anything. It's more a concentration on the people who live and work in Cairo and in one particular area. I've just recently spent a month in a medieval street in Cairo that is a treasure house of art and antiquities, but also very much a living place, nothing like a museum. In the centre it's got the famous bazaar, which is tourism central. But once you get beyond that, you have this kind of living, breathing city with maybe 1 million people crammed into a very short, a very small space, and mostly poor people living and working there. It's a place where tourists don't particularly go, but it's vital and tremendously interesting. As far as my own involvement with Egypt goes, pardon me, I was actually born in Alexandria, on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. My parents were Maltese, and we were British subjects. We emigrated to Australia when I was less than a year old, and we never really belonged to the country. We've been there for generations. My grandparents emigrated there. No, sorry, my great-grandparents emigrated there from Malta. but we were British subjects. We were under a different system of law from the locals, and we never really absorbed into the Egyptian culture. The great divide was religion. My family was Catholic. Some of my relatives were Greek Orthodox, but the great divide wasn't a race. It was religion. We left in 1950. I was born in July 1949, and we arrived in Australia after a horrendous sea voyage in 1950. I was the last of the extended family to be born there, and it was a kind of there was a sort of family view of Egypt as a lovely place where their childhood was spent as children of privilege, and the view was that the Egyptians were quite hopeless at managing their own country. I went back there as an adult in 1978, and what I found was not quite fit with the myth that my family had. And it was a country of tremendous energy. They looked to the future, not the past. It was a place of great energy. It was also very ragged and dusty and dirty and exciting. Then I settled down to business. I had an antique shop in Berry for many years. We had our children here, and I settled down to the kind of life of an adult, which was I reverted to my kind of childhood dreams in about the year 2006, when I was asked to accompany a trip to Egypt by a friend of mine who was a travel agent who organised these trips, and I went along as a kind of supernumerary, and I thought, this is great, I can do this. And one thing led to another. My friend died. He had a travel agency in Nowra. He died, and his son didn't continue with the business, so I started on my own. And what it was packaging tours, selling them to, as it turned out, mostly the university of the third age, and then accompanying them. So it was very exciting. And throughout this time, my view of Cairo especially evolved. First impressions are that it's a big, ugly, kind of dusty city, absolutely jam-packed with humanity. And it's actually true. But then, as I got to know it better, it became obvious that there were some remarkable things in there. And the people were very welcoming in a strange sort of way. There's a kind of outer shell, which I think is a function of cities, big cities, that there's a kind of an outer shell. Everybody's got their head down, getting a move on. But as soon as you have any kind of slight excuse to crack that shell a little bit, the kind of human warmth emerges. Other people are noisy. I don't believe Egyptians actually sleep. And there's a kind of energy that's irresistible. In February, March this year, there was a project that I had in mind for a long time, and that was to get into this particular area and photograph it, and specifically to photograph the people there. So I had the opportunity to go and spend a month in this particular area. The area is centered around a street about 1 kilometre long and about 200 metres on either side, that's jam-packed with World Heritage listed sites. In fact, the whole area is listed by UNESCO. But as I said earlier, there's nothing museum-like about it. It's a vital place. and I was lucky enough to find a hotel, a very beautiful little hotel, smack in the middle of the area in the street of the coppersmiths. So what we're going to do now is go into this little walk. I've divided it up into sections. I'll start talking about images of faith. As you know, Egypt is an Islamic country. It's about 90% Islamic. The majority of the rest, 10%, are Coptic Christians, which we'll be talking about shortly. It's not a particularly nasty form of Islam. It's fairly open. Egypt has a long, like say Morocco, and unlike Syria, for instance, Egypt has had a very, very long history of engagement with the West, and I think that's kind of softened things. There are lunatics, but the government, which is quite corrupt and repressive, manages to keep them under control. The only places that are dangerous in terms of the Islamic fundamentalists spots in the Sinai Peninsula, but in Cairo especially, but in Egypt in general, most part of Egypt, so the Nile Valley, there's a kind of relaxed version of religion. People stop and pray in the middle of the street when it's time. Nobody takes any notice. You're free to go into mosques as long as you're dressed properly, any time except prayer time, and there's no sense of lack of welcome. This shot is actually an old one. This is one of the grand medieval mosques, and that young hippie in the middle there is my son Nicholas. This was taken, when were we there, Miss?
2009.
2009, so this is kind of an old shot. But this just gives you an idea of the grandeur of the mosques. And this is one of the older ones back in this medieval quarter that I was talking about. It's called the Moonlit Mosque, and one of the earliest in terms of influence of architecture. It's one that was copied actually all over the Islamic world. Mosques are places of prayer and places of learning, but they're also like, I guess, like churches and synagogues. They're also places of beauty and order where people who live perhaps not very kind of comfortable life, kind of fairly chaotic life, can experience a sense of order and beauty and calm. The dome symbolically represents heaven, and the square bit above, below the dome represents another form of earthly perfection.
It's a great shot.
I'm sorry?
That's a great shot.
Oh, thank you very much.
Through the window like that, it's excellent.
Thank you. It took a little while to get that. Yeah. I spent a lot of time hanging around, you know, just waiting for the light and everything. We sometimes go on photo expeditions, and Megan's very, very patient while I'm hanging around waiting for the cloud to move or something. This is the niche, the prayer niche, which faces Mecca and kind of defines a mosque. A mosque, really, all it needs to be a mosque is an enclosed space or even an open space that points towards Mecca. And you can see here the quality of the work. This is a particularly fine one, and people, I think, respond to that beauty very, very strongly. Hi, Jean.
Are they tiled?
No, the question was, are they tiles? No, they're marble. And if you look at the arch, the double arch, you can see that the dark ones and the light ones are mirror images of each other. They're also cut through all the way in, so that they're actually kind of slid in. And there's absolutely no structural reason why that should be so. The arch is just as strong if they're not like that. It's just this extraordinary care and display of craftsmanship. For these craftspeople, their highest kind of work, their best work is always reserved for a mosque or a mausoleum or that kind of religious building. As with some of the cathedrals, you think of the cathedrals in France, northern France, for instance. So that kind of quality of the work is reserved for that sort of thing. This is another example. This is stucco. Absolutely magnificent work. This is actually from a building that's no longer a mosque. It's half fallen down, but it's national monument and beautifully preserved. The mosque also are places of ease and reflection. This scene is not at all uncommon. Not at all uncommon. He's just escaping from the heat and dust of the street outside and having a little nap. And nobody, of course, bothers him because it's part of what the mosque is for. And it's also a place of employment. This chap is employed to kind of look after the mosque. The kind of touting for tips is just an extra bonus that they indulge in. And this shot was actually taken several years ago, but I'm including it here now, was taken at Ramadan. Ramadan, as you know, is the period of 40 days of fasting from sunrise to sunset, when people don't eat, drink, smoke, have sex. It's an interesting time when it's during the hot period. Pardon me. It can be quite trying. But what happens every evening is everybody suddenly relaxes. This was taken in the square near the bazaar, and what's happening here is that people are waiting for the signal that the sun has gone down. It used to be a cannon from the citadel. Now it comes over an app on your phone. Egyptians love their phones. And the moment that the signal is given, waiters come rushing out with giant trays of food, steaming food, and everybody gets stuck in, and the atmosphere suddenly changes from one of self-denial to one of celebration. Now, no, I'm fine, thanks, mate. You might have to call an ambulance later, but I'm okay. We've got images of faith turning to look at the Copts. Now, the Copts are they're the original Egyptians, they claim. They were there long before the Arab invasion of the 7th century. And they're the oldest continuous Christian denomination in the world. It was founded by Mark the Evangelist, and it's still going strong. They occupy a very interesting position in Egyptian society. Might be time for that ambulance. Oh, okay. They're about 10% of the population, and they occupy a variety of social positions. What we're going to look at just briefly is the monks in the Delta, who have a separate place within the religion, as do monks, of course, in Christianity. They kind of look at the middle class cults, and then we'll look at some of the poor people. Now, the Delta monasteries are fascinating. I know we're stepping outside of Cairo, but there's, of course, a very close connection between the Delta monasteries and Cairo. They're thriving institutions. They attract educated middle-class men who become monks. The monks are celibate. The priests who are out in parishes are married and have children. So it's quite a distinct thing. The monks are charming individuals. They have a kind of softness about them that's really very appealing. There's a kind of kindness there that two of them are holding hands, and this is entirely characteristic of the monks. I think one of the reasons that the monastic movement is so strong is that the cults have felt very much under pressure. They have for centuries, millennia in fact. When people are under pressure, they I think they reassert their own culture. And I think this is a really powerful recruiting tool for the monks. The government, I remember back in the dark days in Mubarak, he was a brutal dictator, as is the current president, and the line that they both took was that they were the only things that stood between the cults and the fundamentalists, and this partly justified their suppression of the population. And the fact is that they, or at least my opinion is, that they could well be right, that they do in fact suppress the extreme elements that the cults are so frightened of. Whether it's worth the price, I don't know, I'm not Egyptian. This is one of the older monasteries, the monastery of Saint Bishoy. Now, in the bottom centre, there's this plastic wrapped, it's actually a corpse of Saint Bishoy. Now, Saint Bishoy was meant to be miraculously preserved, and my Coptic friends who are quite devout swear that he is in fact as good as the day he died, or perhaps the day before. Until recently, until the 19th century, his hand stuck out from the wrapping that he's in to demonstrate that he was fresh, is that the word? That he was intact. But some mad Muslim tried to cut the hand off to see if it was true. So now it's kept wrapped up, so we can't actually test the veracity of that. But the point I make here is that for the monks, and I think for devout cults, in my experience, my limited experience, the past is still very much alive, and that kind of miraculous view of the world is still very much there. It's not a metaphor. It's a literal truth. Now, this is a shot in another one of the monasteries where a mass was taking place. For some reason, the monks who were attending the mass, not partaking of the mass, always stand on the left, and I have no idea why or what the reason for this is. But this place is very atmospheric, very serene, very welcoming. Can everybody see that okay? Is the light... maybe you hit the lights, please, Gordon. Is that better? Oh, okay, good. And this is in a modern monastery. look, these things just say, to me, just say photograph me, which I did. The person on the right in the red mitre is the abbot of that particular monastery, and he's got the status of a bishop. Now we're going, still sticking with the Copts, we're going to an area called Old Cairo, which was the original settlement of Cairo in the 7th century, but is now the Christian quarter. And we see a different aspect of the Copts here. What we've got is what you might call middle classes. Copts still figure quite prominently in the upper echelons of business, not so much in government or the armed forces, but in business and in the professions. Now, the only Egyptian Secretary General of the United Nations in the 60s, I think, was a man called Boutros Ghali, who was a Copt. His father, also a Copt, had been Prime Minister. So there's that kind of other element of Coptic society, which is actually quite, it's what you might call the public face of Copts, that's prosperous and respectable. And their main kind of areas of interest, especially the tourists, are the churches. This is the what's known as the Hanging Church. The Hanging Church, because it was built above a Roman bastion. The Romans had a minor presence in Cairo, they were mostly in Alexandria, but in Cairo they built a pair of bastions that actually looked on the river. The river has moved since then. And this is built over the bastion. In fact, there's part of the church where you can walk and there's a glass floor and you look down onto the bastion, hence the other term, Hanging Church. And as you can see, it's beautifully restored. And of course it attracts the devout. And we're seeing finally a different aspect altogether of Coptic society, and this is in the slum of, in the shadow of the Makaton Hills. The Makaton Hills form the eastern boundary of Cairo. Cairo is very flat, and it's traditionally been bound by the river in the west and the Makaton Hills on the east. And these people are in a kind of slum that's under the shadow of the Makaton Hills. In the 1960s, the government essentially drove the poorer Copts into what became a ghetto. They were traditionally the garbage collectors and the pig farmers, and they, until very recently, they found out all over Cairo and collected garbage. They recycle on a grand scale, and food scraps go to feeding the pigs. Now, this shot was taken in January 2012. You recall that in January 2011, there was what's known as the Arab Spring, and it was meant to be a movement for democracy, but soon got out of hand. The mob turned on this area. The police stood by, did nothing, and 9 people young men were murdered. Now are called martyrs, and they're depicted on that banner. So there's that kind of sense of being besieged was real in this case, and you can really understand why the Copts in particular are more interested in the security provided by a corrupt government than in our notions of democracy. I think we kind of project what we want in terms of an ideal society onto Egyptians, and it may not necessarily be true. These are shots of various people at work, and you can see that it's not an easy existence. So our last section is we're going to take to the streets where people actually live, work, play. This is an incredible artery that's just to me forms the boundary of the area that I was particularly interested in, which is off to the right. This was on a Friday morning, and the photo doesn't really capture how crowded and noisy and pushing and shoving it all is. And it's an extraordinary thing being in there. You know, I've got a sense of personal space. I think, as we all have, you can forget it. Very often, well, the first time it happened, I was really upset, but I felt someone grabbing me from the shoulders from behind, just gently moving me aside and getting on. And then I realised this is how they walk the way they drive. You just have to move out of the way. If someone's going faster than you, you just move out of the way. And you do the same to everybody else. There is no aggravation involved. I only ever saw one instance of road rage, which was shocking because it was so rare. People blow their horn all the time. I heard from a taxi driver, and taxi drivers, you realise, are really wonderful sources of accurate information all over the world. I heard from a taxi driver that if you're not blowing your horn and you have an accident, if you're not actually honking your horn at the moment of impact, the insurance won't pay out. But it took me a while to realise that no one is actually insured. Another one that I loved was people don't use their indicators, and a taxi driver once again explained to me that indicators flatten your battery. The person who has the right of way in a car, and the cars are like this, is the person who's in front. So of course everybody tries to get in front. But as I said, it's a society that's used to living together, poor people struggling to get on, packed in together, and they know how to do it. They know how to do it. So we're taken to the streets, and now we're in kind of non-tourist Cairo, and this is a scene that's very, very common. This lady appealed to me because of the mobile phone. Everything about the scene is traditional, except for the mobile phone. But the young people, what the young women do, you see how she's got her scarf like this. The young women do it under the chin, do it tightly. And they tuck the phone in like this, so they're free to talk and gesticulate and maybe buy something, you know, tell someone to get out of the way, all at the same time. This is in that main street I was talking about, and it's a little unusual because you've got tourists, obviously tourists there. The tourists congregate in huge numbers around the bazaar, but when you walk up the street, really about 50 metres, 100 metres, it's another world. It's just another world. It becomes completely Egyptian. My hotel was in the street of the Caucasus, a little narrow street where people worked with the same medieval patterns. They were wearing runners and modern clothing, and they weren't building copper, they were making things out of aluminium and steel, but it was still the same pattern. In this rather short and narrow street, you'd go along and you'd have 3 welders side by side, then you'd have 5 people who made parts for refrigerators side by side, and then you'd have 5 or 6 shops selling nothing but lamps. And it's very much in that tradition of the medieval crafts sticking together. So if you wanted to buy something made out of copper or aluminium or steel, you just go there. Except if you're a tourist. Now, what that sheep was doing in the road, in a very urban setting, look, I don't know. It wasn't, occasionally you see livestock in the streets, but usually it's when the feast of sacrifice is coming up, and this is just not the right time of year for it. The sheep was probably wondering what it was doing there too. This is a beggar in one of the tunnels under the road in that area, and there's a whole kind of structure of begging. As you probably know, giving of alms is one of the pillars of Islam, one of the essentials of Islam, and everybody does it. This couple are reluctant to give anything, and there's no shame in begging in the sense that what they're doing is reminding you of your religious duty, and it means that the beggars have a certain attitude. There are also, you said, lots and lots of, especially women, older women, squatting on the footpath, selling little bits of tissue, little packets of tissues, and they accept whatever you give them, but they're a cut above. They're actually vendors because they're giving you something in return. Yeah. And I've heard, I haven't actually said it, but I've heard of beggars who do very well give money to other beggars. So we come on to vendors. Everybody in Egypt has got something to sell, whether it's a service or an object or whatever. Now this is an interesting shop of kind of sexy underwear, and what spoke to me about this was the expression on the face of those two people on the left, who obviously disapprove very strongly. I can't figure out if they're husband and wife or father and daughter, because you still have a kind of tradition of older men marrying quite young women. I suspect they're father and daughter, but I can't be sure. So you have this kind of disapproval, but the point here really is that it never really expresses itself. People, I'm sure in some of the back blocks of Egypt, they wouldn't get away with selling clothing like that, but certainly in a big, sophisticated, cosmopolitan place like Cairo, it's not a problem. This is in one of the squares where poor people go to shop, and everything here is cheap and available to everybody. One of the poultry sellers, there's the street of poultry sellers, and there are a dozen of these shops. Now, what you can do is either on the right, you've got the dressed chicken pieces, and you say that, or on the left, you've got the chooks, and you point to the chook and you say that one, and the vendor grabs the chook, takes it out the back, and a few minutes later comes back with it, kind of not exactly stuffed and mounted, ready to go. I didn't see a single supermarket in my time there. I think that they do exist, but they're in the kind of new suburbs, the new expensive suburbs, that in a way cease to be Egyptian and become kind of Euro-cosmopolitan. This is much nicer. I didn't buy a chook there. And this bloke, I really liked. He was an ice vendor, and he's obviously doing a selling job on the young man who's kind of leaning back and appearing to be very casual. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to impress the ice seller with his own knowledge of ice, and maybe hoping to beat him down a little bit. Yeah, everything is haggled. Absolutely everything. No. When you go to buy food, it's not haggled, but everything else you haggle. And some of my Australian passages are really difficult to cope with. But I think if you enter with the right spirit, it can be quite pleasurable. And the rules are not written, but they're quite firm, is that you don't insult anyone, you don't make an offer that you don't actually mean, and at the end of the transaction you shake hands and maybe accept a cup of tea. And you can be sure that you're paying much more than the locals. But, you know, with our exchange rate, it's quite ridiculous. Taxis are famous for the, you know, ripping people off. So I decided on this trip that I was going to give taxi drivers 100 Egyptian pounds for every trip, regardless of how long it was. And 100 Egyptian pounds, when you come down to it, is like $5. And often they'd be a bit surprised that you give them that much without kind of bargaining. Only once was the meter turned on, and I was absolutely stunned. The meter turned the meter on for every trip. And I was absolutely stunned when it turned the meter on. And the trip cost 30 Egyptian pounds. And I gave him 100 Egyptian pounds and said, don't worry about the change. And we both came out of the encounter completely shocked. It just wasn't right. Now this is, oh gee. What happened there? This is ostensibly a photograph of the hot nuts on the right. But what really appealed to me about this particular scene, and I just lifted my camera and shot, was the gesture of the woman in the middle there pointing up, and it was just a serendipitous shot. Seeing someone like that in the full fig, you know, with everything covered, is quite unusual in Egypt, and very unusual in Cairo. What seems to be the case now is that women, except for Christian women, wear the scarf, and that's the only bit that's kind of Islamic. They get around, the young girls get around in amazing tight clothes, but they still wear this the scarf. And it seems to me that in all my time going there, that's become much more common. And I think this is again an instance of people asserting their culture. I think Islamic cultures have been felt very much under siege, especially since the war in Iraq, with every justification. When you think of Trump's ban on Muslims and all this kind of nonsense, and it shows itself in the way people wear, what people wear, and the way they act. This is 3 generations of antique dealers. I've got a great affinity for antique dealers, as you probably know, and this is the antique dealer standing with his father and his grandfather. I had a very nice transaction with them. I bought a little plate, and they didn't speak any English, and my Arabic is minimal, half a dozen words. But there was something very pleasant in the transaction. It was a very kind of gentle and nice transaction. I didn't haggle with them. And this antique dealer looks quite miserable. He looks as though he hasn't made a sale all week. And believe me, I know exactly how he feels. But then we have a very prosperous seller who you can tell from the expression on his face that he's doing all right. He's sitting there as a coppersmith, and he's selling jewellery and metal items. Now, in the market, which as I said is very, very touristy, there's a most interesting institution, a cafe called Fishali that was opened in the 18th century and has not closed its doors since it opened. And it's a marvellous place. The tourists sit outside, the locals sit inside for some reason. It's boisterous and loud, and very pleasant. Inside Fish Eye, I've shot this, which is quite an unusual image of a woman in a traditional dress smoking a shisha on her own in a cafe. So it's quite unusual. I just like the atmospherics of this. And the main figure there is the head waiter. He's been there for centuries. And there's obviously some joke going on behind him. And the waiters are all kind of giggling and laughing. But he's far too dignified to join in the laughter. He's an important person. The waiters are quite different. I was there once with a small group, and we were approached by a man selling watches. He kind of pushed his sleeve up with half a dozen watches, and they were genuine Omegas, genuine Rolexes, genuine watches, guaranteed 100%. And there was a woman in our group who she was kind of toying with him, and it's not a good thing to do. And she was looking at a watch, and he was getting exasperated because she wasn't following the rules. And she said, but is it waterproof? And he said, madam, it is, and dropped it in her tea. He then apologised profusely and ordered another cup of tea. That seems to typify the Egyptian sense of humour, kind of slightly abrasive, certainly disreputable, but extremely funny. Yeah, when you're walking in the streets, you hear people kind of shouting jokes and comments backwards and forwards all the time. We have a brief look at the crafts. This is the street of the tent makers. It's still in existence. The tent makers have this craft of applique of fabric on fabric. The tent makers were very important really until about the early part of the 20th century. They made the covering for the cloth that went over the Kaaba, which is the big black stone in the centre of Islam's most holy site in Mecca. And it's the focus of the annual pilgrimage. The tent makers made this cloth, and it was conducted by an Egyptian sheikh from one of the gates very near here, one of the ancient city gates through the city and then all the way to Mecca. That changed in the 1920s, I believe, but they were always very important people, and they still do very good work, very attractive work. This is an interesting revival of the crafts. The hotel that I was staying in had a downstairs section where a wealthy Egyptian Canadian doctor rebuilt the place, so they do a hotel upstairs and a craft centre downstairs. And what we've got is this very encouraging thing of a young woman learning how to do this marvellous inlay of silver on brass. It's a very expensive and difficult craft. They charge accordingly, but it's greatly encouraging. Most of the crafts you buy in Egypt are just junk, kind of tourist rubbish. So it's very encouraging to see this kind of serious craft work. And a lone tailor, this is his whole shop is just is basically on his lap. And a welder. This was at night, as you can see, and sparks flying everywhere, crowds kind of streaming past, and he was just getting on with it. What appealed to me about this was the light. And we finish up with the idea of Friday night. As you know, Friday night is the big night of celebration. The weekend is Friday and Saturday. And on Friday night, everybody turns out. It's just this mad sadness. It's very kind of friendly and relaxed and very, very crowded. This was a few doors up from my hotel. And then we go into that main drag, and just everybody is out there. He's waiting for the action to start, and he looks quite relaxed about it. And these very cool young men are about to do some serious business. These people are reasonably prosperous. They have their own kind of stand that they work and that they do well. And this is in one of the little side streets. As you can see, it looks very kind of festive. And I'd like to finish with this image. This was one of the poultry sellers at the beginning of that street of the poulterers. He's not a particularly prosperous individual. And what we've got, I think, here is the kind of contrast between the older man sitting down there in his traditional dress, the young woman on the left who's obviously a tourist. There's the Pepsi Cola sign in the background, and behind that there's one of the ancient city gates. So you have this kind of mix. What is really the essence of Cairo. I think there's a kind of incomprehension between the man and the woman, that they occupy different worlds. And Cairo is a bit like that. You can skim along the surface and go to the pyramids and the grand mosques and the museum, that kind of thing, and not really kind of dip into the world of the ordinary people. I don't think that you become an expert by spending a month there or whatever, but I think what that month may do is just open you up to the possibilities of the ordinary people. Now, can I have any comments or questions? Omar, can I hear from you? Come up to the microphone.
I don't think she's buying what he's selling, Patrick. That woman there, I don't think she's buying what he's selling.
Hi, my name is Omar Khalifa. Actually, I was born in Egypt, and we left there when I was only 6 years old. Father was Egyptian, mother American, so I was attracted by your talk. I wasn't thinking I was going to come and speak.
I'm sorry to say that.
But you know, those pictures bring back the sounds, and also it's funny how even your olfactory nerves kick in, and you can almost smell Cairo in the pictures. And you know, obviously the dust and everything else. It hasn't changed, I guess. When we've gone back a few times, we left because of the political situation when I was young, and with Nasser coming in, and he nationalized and imprisoned a lot of people. So we left basically with the suitcases under our arms that we could, and left the country. Didn't go back for almost 13 years, and lost everything. My parents lost everything. But they rebuilt themselves, rebuilt their lives in America. But we've always had this duality, as probably other people in this room too, of having a foot in each camp. And now I have a foot in 3 camps, living here over 20 years in Australia. But it comes back, and I think Egypt has its timelessness, like other countries that seem to have not left behind a lot of what was there. Many other countries, I think, move on and sort of bury the past, and I think here the past is being unburied, and I think people like you who do a great service of bringing people to experience keeps that alive as well, because people value it more when there are reasons for people to come and visit. But anyway, I'm not sure what else I can say, but it was a pleasure to see your photos and have those memories flashing back in my head. I was actually born in Cairo, so in Zamalek, which is the island in the middle. I mean, that's where we live, in Zamalek, yeah.
Okay.
And the
Nicest part.
yeah, it was the island in the middle of the Nile there in Cairo. But Alexandria was a place we used to holiday, and that was, for a lot of people in Cairo, that was their holiday destination when they wanted to go to the beach, and that's where we went back to when we came back to it as well later on.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments or questions?
Patrick, I'm just very curious as to why, if you know the reason why your great-grandparents immigrated to Egypt from Malta, because it's such a different culture, different language, different food.
Well, why immigrate from Malta to Egypt? The simple reason was work, that they're just poverty. Yeah. And Egypt was always had a very strong European presence. So it was in a way they didn't move to a different culture. They took the culture with them and kept separate from the Egyptian culture. So I mean, very few of my parents, my parents' generation, between them spoke Maltese, French, Italian, Greek, and a little bit of Arabic, but very little Arabic. Enough Arabic to talk to servants. So there was there was a different legal system. There was a local legal system for the Egyptians. There was a French and there was a British. So it was separate. And I think that was kind of reaction to I think immigrants like to keep their culture with them, but I think it was quite an extreme case in Egypt. Great mixing between the Europeans and the barrier of religion with the locals. Can I ask who else has been to Egypt? Oh, okay. And did you like it?
Oh, I found it absolutely wonderful, because we were there to visit the pyramids and everything else. I went with an archaeologist, and it was a very, very small group of people, which was fantastic. He took us places where a lot of tourists never went. But what I do remember about Cairo was the dust. It was like you come back in the evening to your hotel, been cleaned, but there was always a fine layer of dust, like tongue.
That's so Cairo.
And you think, gosh, am I breathing there? Yeah.
You know, when I took groups, we would usually arrive, because of the flight schedules, usually arrive quite early in the morning and drive from the airport, which is on the eastern side, to the hotels near the pyramids, which is on the western side. And we'd be driving through these grey, dusty, dirty streets with new apartment buildings that look as though they're about to fall down. And I could see the look on my passengers' faces. They were thinking, where has he brought me? And then, of course, we hit the pyramids, and so things would be okay.
I think the study of transport in Cairo is amazing. To see a bus in which there's people on the top and people hanging on the back, and if you look through the side of the bus, there's very little daylight on the other side. That's how full the buses are.
Yeah, they also have these little taxis, like vans, that are called service.